I remember the taste of recycled air, metallic, tainted by the sweat of 1,000 men and the dust of 100 planets. For most of my life it was all I knew. The air in the cargo bays of the Imperator Vexilla was the same from one sector to the next. It was a constant, a reminder of the unending rhythm of duty. They say the stars sing to the psychers, that the warp is a symphony of raw thought. But I've never felt that. Never felt the majesty of the stars, the power of the warp, not in the cold, claustrophobic confines of this ship. All I hear is the hum of the Geller field, the constant, low-frequency vibration that rattles through the ship's hull. It's the only music I know, the only sound that's ever been constant, the only thing I've come to rely on. The hum is a pulse, a heartbeat that carries me from one cycle to the next, and that's all I need to know. There's no room for the grandeur of the stars in this life. I suppose it's easy to get used to. The way the engines never stop, the way the hum vibrates through the deck plates and into your bones so that after a while, it becomes part of you. You don't notice it anymore. You don't notice the recycled air either. You just breathe. You just keep going. Sometimes I forget what it's like to be anywhere else. The noise of the ship becomes everything. I could close my eyes and I wouldn't be able to tell if I was in the cargo hold or the barracks or the bowels of the ship. It all feels the same. Just cold, steel walls, endless corridors, and that damned hum of the engines. It's like the ship itself has become my skin, and I've lost track of what the world beyond it feels like. My days were simple. A series of small, monotonous tasks that never change. A grunt's work. The cargo manifest to check, the ration supply to inspect, the weapon systems to monitor. It's the same every day like clockwork. I eat my corpse starch rations. They never taste of anything, but they're enough to fill the pit in my stomach. They keep me alive. And that's all they need to do. I never thought I'd live a life like this. It was supposed to be temporary, wasn't it? I was supposed to do my duty, keep my head down, fight a few battles, and then get out. But that was years ago. Decades ago. I don't remember when I stopped thinking that I'd leave. When I stopped thinking about anything beyond the job at hand. Now I just do it. Over and over. Day in, day out. Keep things running. Make sure the gears of this ship don't falter. That's all I know. That's all I'm good for. I've been here for so long that the routine has become my comfort. The quiet, repetitive nature of my work. Checking manifests, double-checking inventory, overseeing the daily routines of the other guardsmen, there's peace in that. There's a strange solace in the nothingness. The nothingness of being just one small part of a machine that keeps moving forward, never asking questions, never wondering what comes next. Just work. And for the most part, I've accepted that. It's easier that way. Asterisk, the recruits come and go. We all do in the end. None of us are meant to be remembered. Tobias, he's one of the fresh-faced kids who was assigned to my squad a few months back. He talks about his home world all the time. Says it's an agri-world. Says the dirt there is real, not like the filthy metal floors of the ship. He tells me about the wide-open skies and the crops he used to harvest, and the way his family is waiting for him to come home. He talks about going back one day. Back to the dirt. Back to the sky. _ I don't have the heart to tell him the truth we all know. You don't go back once you're in the guard. Not alive. Not from this. The guard takes you in, chews you up, and spits you out when it's done with you. If you're lucky, you die in the field of battle. If you're unlucky, you die on some forsaken planet, forgotten by everyone but the Emperor. The kid's optimism is fragile. It's beautiful in a way, that kind of hope. But I can't help but think of how thin it is. Like a candle flickering in the dark. It'll burn out. I don't know when, but it will. And he'll be like the rest of us, a cog in the machine, swallowed whole by the war we've been fighting since the dawn of time. I share my ration with him most days. A small thing, I guess. But it's something. Something I can give him. His enthusiasm for the future is something I'll never have. I envy him. But I also know it's only a matter of time before it dies. Before the weight of this life grinds him down. It's not just Tobias. It's the whole damn ship. Every one of us is waiting. Waiting for orders. Waiting for the next battle. But most of all, we're just waiting to die. You don't join the Imperial Guard with the expectation of surviving. You join because it's a life. A job. something to do. Something that keeps you from getting lost in the dark. But eventually that's all you become. A cog. A wheel in the Imperium's machine. Nothing more. Nothing less. And then came the Vox message. The one that changed everything. A sudden, sterile voice from the ship's bridge. Citizen Kalen Varus, designation 77 Alpha 9992. Report to the commissariat at once. My stomach dropped. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew it wasn't good. The voice was cold. Impersonal. It didn't give any explanation. Just a command. And just like that, everything shifted. The other soldiers in my squad stopped what they were doing. They didn't look at me. They didn't have to. I could feel the eyes on me. Their expressions were a mix of fear and something else. Something I couldn't name. But I didn't need to. The commissar doesn't call you unless it's for something important. The question was, what did they want with me? The commissar only called you for two things. To die in some glorious way that would make the others fight harder. Or to go somewhere worse. I had never been called before. My stomach twisted. The strange reverence I saw on my comrades' faces only made the feeling worse. They didn't say anything. They didn't need to. But I knew they were thinking it, he's not coming back. They didn't even salute me. They didn't need to. They knew just like I did what this was. And yet, I couldn't stop the thought from worming its way into my head. Why? What did I do to get picked? I'm just a soldier. A cog. Nothing more. I glanced around at the others, trying to read the expressions on their faces. I saw Tobias, the young recruit I'd shared a meal with only hours ago. He was looking at me with something between awe and fear, his lips pressed tight. He didn't know what this meant. He didn't understand that the commissar only calls for those who've already been marked. I stood up from my seat, feeling like I was moving through someone else's body. Not my own. Not anymore. Two Arbites were waiting for me. Silent. Motionless. They didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge me at all. Their faces were hidden behind those dark, faceless helmets, cold and unblinking. But their presence? It was all authority. All command. I didn't question it. I didn't have to. I followed them. There was no room to resist, not anymore. I was already gone in the eyes of my comrades. As I passed them, there was a moment, a brief flash of something. Reverence. Maybe that was the right word. It wasn't just fear. It was like they had already accepted that I wouldn't return. It wasn't sadness, not really. It was understanding. They knew what this was. They knew what happened to people who were called by the commissar. I couldn't bring myself to turn around. Couldn't bring myself to say goodbye. Not out loud. They didn't need to hear it. They knew. The corridor stretched before me, the same gray walls, the same low hum. The hum I had lived with for what felt like forever. But now it wasn't comforting anymore. Now it felt like a countdown. I didn't even know where they were taking me. But it didn't matter. I wasn't supposed to know. I wasn't supposed to question it. It was like the rest of the ship, moving along without ever asking if I was ready. If I was prepared. I was escorted through the bowels of the ship, past crew members, soldiers, all of them too busy to even glance at me. The lower decks, where the cargo holds and power generators lay, smelled of oil and burnt metal. The ship felt bigger now. Its hum seemed to intensify as I walked further into its depths, as if the engines themselves were preparing for something. I heard the familiar voices of the crew echoing down the corridors. They were ignoring me, not even sparing a second glance. They didn't need to. They had their orders. They were part of the machine too. Just like me. What the hell is happening? Why now? What's different about me? I'm just a soldier. Just a man. There's nothing special about me. I'm just a cog in the machine. So why do they need me? Why pick me? What did I do to deserve this? I don't know how long I walked for. I stopped noticing the time. It could have been hours, it could have been minutes. But everything felt like it was closing in around me, the long corridors stretching farther and farther. My boots echoed louder now, each step magnified in the silence. Finally, I reached the commissariat. The door opened silently, just like everything else on this ship. Silent, sterile, it felt cold the moment I crossed the threshold. The sound of my boots against the cold metal floor seemed to be the only noise in the room. It wasn't a loud noise. It was just the sound of the ship moving forward. The commissar didn't look up as I entered. He didn't need to. He was already aware of my arrival. He knew what this was. This wasn't about me. This was just another cog moving into place. The room felt suffocating. The walls, cold, gray and angular, did nothing to make it feel less oppressive. The light was harsh. Too bright. It made the shadows dance in the corners, made everything feel off, as though the room itself was waiting for something terrible to happen. The commissar glanced up finally, his eyes cold, distant. He said nothing at first. Sergeant Kalen Varys. You've been selected. Prepare yourself. Selected? What the hell does that mean? Selected for what? What the hell is going on? Report to the transport shuttle immediately. The Emperor demands it. I didn't respond. I couldn't. There was nothing to say. I had no words left. I just stood there for a moment, feeling my heart racing in my chest. The room felt too small. Too confined. I wanted to speak, to ask what was happening, but the words wouldn't come. I nodded, the only thing I could do, and turned to leave. The sound of my boots was even louder now, ringing through the cold, sterile hallway. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't walking down a corridor anymore. I was walking toward something much bigger. Something I couldn't understand. Something that would change everything. I don't know what's waiting for me. I don't know why they've called me. I don't know anything anymore. I just know that my life, my small, insignificant life, is about to end. The feeling in my chest grew heavier as I was escorted by two silent Arbites. They didn't speak. Didn't need to. Their mere presence was enough. It was then that I realized. I wasn't just walking down a hallway. I was walking down a path I couldn't turn away from. I had been chosen for something. I wasn't going back. And wherever I was headed, there was no escape. I stopped at the doorway, looking back at the squad. The faces I'd seen every day for years now seemed distant, even though they were only a few steps away. There were no goodbyes. No salutes. Just silence. Tobias, still sitting where I left him, his hands now clenched tightly around that prayer book, his eyes darting nervously between me and the others. He had that same look again, the one that seemed to carry a silent question, the kind you never ask because you already know the answer. He wasn't going to say anything. He didn't have to. He knew. I could feel the weight of their eyes on me, but no one spoke. Not a single word. I didn't expect them to. We never say goodbyes in the Guard. Not in any real sense. We all knew what was happening even if it wasn't spoken aloud. It's the unwritten rule. When the commissar calls, you don't return. Not unless you're marked for something else. The others didn't look scared. They didn't look relieved either. They just looked accepting. It was that quiet understanding that none of us was more important than the next. We were just another set of hands, just another set of feet marching down the same damn path. The faces of my squad didn't seem to change. They knew. I could see it in their eyes even if none of them would admit it. They knew I wouldn't be coming back. I gave them one last look, but it wasn't much. It was all I had left. A silent acknowledgement. I couldn't think of anything to say to them. I didn't need to. I couldn't tell them anything they didn't already know. I turned away and followed the two Arbites as they led me down the narrow hallways, past crew members who didn't even look up. The corridors felt smaller as I walked. The walls, once a part of the rhythm of my life, now felt like they were pressing in on me. The air was colder here, and the usual mechanical hum of the ship now seemed louder. The clank of my boots was the only sound I could hear. It echoed against the cold, lifeless walls as I moved, almost too loud in the silence. I passed the same supply lockers, the same storage rooms. Everything was the same. And yet, for the first time, I felt like I was seeing it all through different eyes. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. I knew what I was leaving behind. The same crew, the same routine, the same small, insignificant life. It was a life that didn't matter to anyone but me, and I knew that too. We were all just cogs in the machine. It didn't matter if I was gone or if Tobias was next. Or if the next grunt to walk this same damn path was someone else. We were all just soldiers, just numbers on a list. Just a piece of the war. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being pulled somewhere. Somewhere I wasn't ready for. There was no sense of control anymore. Every step I took felt like it was leading me towards something, some destiny I couldn't outrun. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't a battle. It was something else entirely, something I couldn't fight. The faces of my squad stayed with me though. The young faces, the worn ones. They all blended together as I walked. I wouldn't remember them as clearly as I thought I would. I wouldn't remember what I was leaving behind. All I'd remember was the pull of the unknown, and the bitter taste of resignation as I moved away from everything that had ever felt familiar. I kept walking. The doors to the commissariat opened ahead and I walked through them without thinking. There was no turning back now. The doors slid shut behind me with a quiet hiss, sealing me off from everything I knew. All I could hear now was the sound of the engines still humming, still pulsing. But it was different now. It was just background noise like everything else. The familiar hum was no longer enough to mask the growing weight in my chest. I wasn't part of that life anymore. I was something else now. The real journey was about to begin. The transport's engines hummed down to a soft murmur as we began to descend, and the subtle vibrations that had accompanied me for as long as I could remember slowly faded. But the silence that followed felt heavier somehow, more real. The ship's rumbling had always been my constant companion, a steady rhythm, like the beat of a drum, keeping me in time with the world around me. But now, as we began our descent, it felt as if the entire ship, the entire universe itself, had come to a sudden halt. For the first time since I boarded the Imperator Vexilla, I felt a strange nervousness creeping in. It wasn't the usual fear of battle or of death that I'd grown so accustomed to. No, this was different. This was something deeper, something primal. We were landing on Holy Terra, the seat of the Emperor's will, the cradle of humanity. And all I could do was stare at the empty walls of the transport capsule, feeling more and more insignificant by the second. We were approaching Holy Terra, and I couldn't shake the weight of that thought. No longer a mere vessel of war, we were now headed for a place so vast, so incomprehensible, that it made everything I had ever known feel smaller than a grain of sand on the beach. The transport doors slid open with a mechanical hiss. I didn't know what I expected, but the first thing that hit me was the air. It was thicker, colder, filled with a strange stench of incense, but also something more metallic. Ancient. It felt alive, but in a way I had never known. The air itself had weight. It pressed down on me like I was being surrounded by the breath of the Imperium itself. This was Terra. I stepped out, blinking against the light. We were on a massive platform, surrounded by stone and marble, the floor gleaming smooth beneath my boots. The sky was a faint gray, with clouds hanging like some ancient tapestry overhead, cloaking the heavens from view. I had heard stories. They all tell the same tale about Holy Terra. How big it is. How it's a world that doesn't end. But I didn't know. I couldn't have known. It's impossible to explain the scale of it all. Every word they say about it is still too small to grasp. The stories about the Emperor, the Imperial Palace, they were just that. Stories. Until now. The vastness of it struck me like a slap to the face. I had heard of Terra, of course. I had seen the pics. I had studied the histories, learned about the grandeur of the Imperial Palace, the scale of the Imperial Cathedral that spread across the planet's surface. But none of that had prepared me for what I saw. What I felt. I wasn't looking at a city. No. This was a world. A world of stone, metal, and eternal power. It stretched as far as the eye could see, far beyond anything I could comprehend. A single massive sprawl of towering spires and colossal structures that scraped the sky, like fingers of a god reaching for the stars. Everything here was huge. The buildings towered above me, Gothic, ornate, with spires that stretched so high they seemed to melt into the clouds, where the light barely penetrated. The walls of the buildings were carved with intricate symbols, ancient and incomprehensible, as though time itself had imprinted its mark on the very stone. The air around me felt heavy, burdened by the weight of 10,000 years of human history. The sky here, it's suffocating. The buildings stretch up like they want to touch the heavens. The city doesn't end. I thought I knew what a city was. I thought I had seen vastness before, but this was a place that could never be fully explored. The enormity of it crushed me. It made me feel like nothing. Like I didn't matter. Like I never had. I'm insignificant here. A grain of sand. There are 1,000 men like me, 1,000 soldiers who pass through this place. And none of us matter. Not to Terra. Not to the Emperor. I had spent my life in the shadow of the Imperium, but now, standing here, I realized how much of it had been a lie. The starry illusions of grandeur had been replaced by raw reality. There's nothing glamorous about it. Nothing glorious about being one small, faceless part of this machine. We were led through more corridors that seemed to stretch on forever, the walls towering above us, filled with strange markings that I couldn't even begin to understand. The air felt thicker here, almost like it was infused with the faith of the thousands who had walked these paths before us. There was a palpable weight to it, a heaviness that pressed down on my chest and seemed to make the air harder to breathe. The power of Terra was everywhere. It was in the stones, in the architecture, in the very air itself. And I was nothing but a fleeting shadow, a figure lost among the thousands of others walking the same dark corridors. I felt small. Smaller than I've ever felt in my life. I don't think I had ever truly understood just how insignificant I was until I set foot on Terra. There's nothing left to hope for here. Nothing left to fight for. The Emperor's light, the hope of salvation, it's all a lie. I'm just another man in a sea of millions. Finally, we reached an antechamber. It was vast, with high, arched ceilings and polished marble floors. The chamber smelled of incense, a heavy scent that filled my lungs with the feeling of ancientness, of things that had been burned away and were never to return. The walls were lined with symbols I couldn't recognize, and in the center of it all stood tall figures, their armor glinting like polished gold. I looked around. There were others in the room, men and women who had been chosen like me. They wore the same silent expressions, their faces tired, their eyes distant. I could feel the weight of their gazes on me, but no one spoke. We were all being led down the same path, walking toward the same end. There was no escape. Not from here. Not from Terra. This was holy Terra. This was where the Emperor ruled. But there was no glory here. No honor. Just the cold weight of centuries of sacrifice and death. I could feel it. The burden of 10,000 years of history pressing down on my chest. It was more than just a city. It was a living entity, pulsing with the fate of every man, every woman, every child who had ever been sacrificed in the name of survival. And I was just another name to be added to the list. The Gothic spire seemed to reach up forever, stretching past what I could see. I couldn't look at it any longer. The enormity was suffocating. There was no relief here. No comfort. Just the weight of purpose, and I couldn't shake the feeling that everything I had ever known, everything I had ever believed in, was about to be torn away. I couldn't breathe. Not because of the air, but because of the feeling that I had just become part of something bigger than myself. But not in a good way. This wasn't salvation. This wasn't the great cause I thought we were fighting for. This was a trap. And I was already caught in it. But I couldn't turn back. Not now. There was nowhere else to go. Not here, not on Terra. This place had swallowed everything, and all I could do was stand in its shadow. And wait for whatever fate was waiting for me. The doors slid open and I stepped into the antechamber, feeling the weight of the air shift around me. I wasn't sure what I expected, but it wasn't this. The room was cold and vast, and it seemed to stretch forever. The walls were adorned with strange symbols I didn't recognize, their sharp edges carved into stone, filled with something ancient. The smell of incense was thick, heavy, mixed with something else, something metallic like the sharp tang of blood long forgotten. I wasn't alone in the room. There were others. A small group. A dozen, maybe less. Men and women all brought here for the same reason. We stood in silence, just waiting, not sure what was expected of us. Each of us knew the truth. None of us were supposed to be here. None of us were supposed to matter. Among them I recognized Lyra. She had been a fixture in the crew quarters. An administratum scribe, I think. Always busy, always scribbling down figures and reports, her face pale and drawn from hours spent hunched over data slates. She was older than me, her skin thin and almost sickly, from what I could only imagine was years of her life spent buried in numbers and paperwork. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her, knuckles white, eyes cast downward, but I could see the faint tremor running through her fingers. She looked like she had already accepted her fate, or at least was trying to. I could hear her voice, quiet, almost to herself, as she muttered something under her breath. Asterisk, I never thought it would be me. Asterisk. The words hung in the air, thick with resignation. She wasn't asking for sympathy. She wasn't even looking for an answer. She just said it, like she was talking to herself, trying to come to terms with the truth of why she was here. Why any of us were here. It didn't matter how hard you worked or how much you sacrificed in the Imperium. In the end, we were all just numbers. And for some of us, that number came up sooner than expected. I didn't have the heart to say anything to her. What could I say? I didn't have any answers. No comfort to offer. We were all just cogs. And cogs don't question the machine. I turned my eyes to the man standing next to her. Torgus, a farmer from an agri-world. His hands were gnarled and cracked, veins standing out like twisted cords. I didn't need to ask where he'd come from. It was written in every line of his face, every weathered inch of his skin. He had spent his life in the fields, living under a sun that didn't care if you lived or died. He'd had enough of that. Now here he was, a cog in the machine. Torgus stood with the kind of quiet dignity that can only come from a life spent fighting against impossible odds. A life where you keep going because that's all you can do. I heard him mutter, his voice low and rough. Asterisk, a man doesn't get used to the idea of dying. But it's not the dying I'm worried about. It's what comes after. What's left of me after they're done with me. Asterisk. There was a kind of bitter truth in his words. He wasn't afraid of dying. No one in the guard is. But what came after death? That was the part that haunted you. Who are you when everything that made you, is gone? What's left when you've been drained, used up by a machine you never had a say in? It wasn't about the sacrifice. It was about what happens to your soul after the sacrifice is made. I looked at him, not knowing what to say because I felt it too. The same fear that echoed in his voice was buried in the back of my mind. That quiet terror, like something waiting just behind your thoughts, ready to grab hold and never let go. Then I saw the Skitarii Ranger. He stood stiffly as if he was more machine than man. His limbs were metal, glowing faintly with the hum of servos and gears. His face, what little was visible beneath the cold, mechanical shell, was hard and expressionless. His eyes, however, told a different story. They were human eyes, with the faintest flicker of something real behind the cold, calculated mask of the machine. I saw him glance at me, his metal hand moving almost mechanically to his side. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his voice came out in a low, mechanical hum that sent a chill through me. Asterisk, all that I have left is this. The machine is my body now. My thoughts are his. Asterisk. I wasn't sure what he meant by asterisk his asterisk dot. I didn't have to ask. The Omnicia was the only master that mattered to him now. But that's the thing about the Skitarii, asterisk, they're not just soldiers asterisk. They've given up something vital to become what they are. They've been transformed into weapons, tools to serve a purpose they no longer question. They don't fear death because they've already died. Their humanity has been replaced with the cold logic of the machine. It wasn't pity that I felt for him. It wasn't even fear. It was understanding. A kind of knowing that when you've been changed so fundamentally, there's no going back. You become something else. And that's what scared me the most. Across from me was a young boy, no older than 15, his face still soft with the remnants of youth. Jarn, I learned later. He had that look in his eyes, the look of someone who hadn't yet seen the true darkness of the universe. His hands were shaking, fingers trembling as he clutched at the small prayer book in his hands. I could hear his rapid breaths, see the way his chest rose and fell. He looked around at the rest of us, his eyes wide and uncertain, before his voice broke through the heavy silence. Asterisk, is there a way out? Is there anything we can do to stop it? Asterisk. His voice cracked with the weight of genuine fear. I could feel the same fear in my own chest, but I couldn't answer him. What could I say? There was no way out. There was nothing we could do. We had been chosen. And all we could do now was wait for whatever fate had in store for us. I didn't want to answer him. I didn't want to take that last bit of hope away from him. He was just a kid. But I couldn't lie to him either. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. The others, the Skitarii, the Administratum Scribe, and even Torgus, they all knew the same thing. We were all here because we were necessary, because the Emperor's will required it. And none of us had the luxury of asking why. We were just cogs. Just pieces of something bigger, and that was the truth we all had to face. All we could do now was wait. Wait for the unknown. Wait for what was to come next. But none of us would walk away from it the same. The terror that filled the room wasn't just mine. It was ours. And the strange thing was, in that terror, in that shared understanding of what was happening, I felt a strange sense of unity. We were all just people. Ordinary people. But we had been bound together by fate. In that moment, we were all the same. The transport capsule jolted slightly as it began its descent. The hum of the ship's engine seemed to fade, replaced by a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated through the floor, the walls, the very air itself. I hadn't expected it to feel like this. The weight of it, the sense of something ancient, something far beyond anything I had ever known, pressing in around me. I looked around at the others in the capsule. They were as silent as I was, each of us feeling the same tension, the same gnawing dread. The cold, sterile walls of the ship were gone now, replaced by the dark, foreboding interior of the Imperial Palace. The smooth, metallic corridors of the ship had been swallowed up by a different kind of space. A space that felt like it had existed long before any of us, long before the Imperium itself. The light inside the capsule dimmed as we descended further. It was hard to tell if the lights were fading, or if it was simply the deepening shadows, but something about the atmosphere had changed. The air was no longer just recycled and stale. It was thick now, heavy with the weight of history, thick with a presence that made my skin crawl. There was no turning back. I tried to breathe deeply, but the air felt different, like it had absorbed centuries of secrets. The deep hum of the transport capsule systems was the only sound, and yet it felt like the very ship was holding its breath. Outside, I could see the massive structures of the Imperial Palace, their dark forms moving past us, rising higher the deeper we went. I couldn't keep my eyes from darting around, the cold dread making the hairs on the back of my neck rise. The architecture here was nothing like I'd seen before. It wasn't the pristine, ordered structure of the ship. No, this was something else entirely. The walls were made of something ancient, stone and metal, intertwined like the very structure of the Emperor's will. I could feel the weight of time pressing in on me, the sacred purpose of this place overwhelming in its scale, in its power. These were halls that had witnessed millennia of faith, of suffering, of the Imperium's unyielding march across the stars. Every inch of this place had history carved into it, every shadow carried the weight of 1,000 souls sacrificed for the Emperor's will. The servo skulls appeared, floating past the capsule, their red eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. I had seen them before, tools of the Adeptus Mechanicus, but never like this. Never in this place. The skulls floated silently, passing through the shadows, their whirring mechanical limbs barely making a sound. Their eyes locked onto me as they passed, and I could feel their gaze. It wasn't just mechanical. There was something alive in them, something conscious. I've seen them before. In the barracks, in the factories. The servo skulls. But here in this place they weren't just machines. They weren't just tools. There was something almost alive about them. The way their eyes blinked, the way they moved with purpose. Purpose. But what purpose? Were they just watching us? Were they measuring us? I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't the only ones being observed here. The walls were listening. The floors, the air itself, it all felt alive with something beyond us. The further we descended, the more the light around us flickered. For a moment, we were in complete darkness, the capsule's internal system struggling to keep the lights on. Then a hum of energy surged through the walls, and the lights flared back to life, casting strange shadows across the walls. The arches above us, etched with symbols I couldn't understand, seemed to twist and writhe with the new light, as if they were moving in time with the pulse of the ship's systems. The deeper we went, the more the air felt like it was pressing down on me. The walls seemed to close in, narrowing the space. Shadows stretched long across the floor, twisted and unnatural, as if something was watching us from within them. The further we went, the harder it became to breathe. The air tasted of ancient dust and sacrifice. A part of me wanted to scream, to demand that we turn back, but I knew we couldn't. There was no going back now. The deepening gloom of the palace was swallowing us whole, and we were just along for the ride. Asterisk asterisk. I could hear the soft chanting now, distant voices reverberating through the walls, the unseen choir that sang in this place. It wasn't like the hum of the ship's engines or the clanking of our boots on the metal floors. This sound was timeless, eternal, like the echo of a prayer that had been repeated so many times it had become part of the very fabric of reality. It seemed to fill the air, wrapping itself around us, but it wasn't comforting. No, it was a reminder. A reminder of the Emperor's will, of the price humanity had paid to survive. It wasn't a prayer of hope. It was something else. Something that carried the weight of centuries of sacrifice. I could feel it in my bones. The sound of devotion. The sound of millions who had died to keep the Emperor's light burning. The cost of survival. And we were just the latest to be offered up. The weight of that reality pressed down on me like the air itself had grown heavier. We passed through great, dark chambers that seemed to stretch for miles, full of ancient machinery I couldn't comprehend. Massive, tangled cables ran along the walls, twisted and thick, pulsing with an energy that I could feel, even if I couldn't see it. Looming machines that had been built eons ago whirred and clicked, their functions unclear, but their purpose undeniable. They were part of something greater, something fate-driven, and they had no mercy. There was something wrong about all of it. The machinery was so old, so twisted. Cables as thick as my arm, pulsing with an unnatural glow, ran through the walls. I could feel their presence, the power they held. It wasn't a gentle hum. It was something forceful, something that demanded to be noticed. These were the machines that kept the Imperium moving, the machines that kept humanity alive. But at what cost? What price did we pay to keep these ancient engines running? The light flickered again, and we passed by a chamber filled with vat-grown creatures. Their faces were barely human, their limbs bloated and twisted, their bodies reduced to mere parts. I had seen such things before, but here, in the heart of the Emperor's domain, the sight of them filled me with something worse than fear. I didn't feel disgust. I felt a cold, empty knowing. They weren't human. Not anymore. They were just pieces. Tools just like us. Tools to serve the Emperor. But they had been altered, twisted into something grotesque by the very machine they were meant to serve. The smell in the air was thick with the stench of decay. And yet they were still alive. Still breathing. Still part of the machine. And I couldn't help but wonder, how much of that would be me? We descended further, past strange servo-priests, chanting in low, mechanical voices. Their bodies seemed to blur between human and machine, each one more alien than the last. Their eyes were dim behind the glass of their helmets, but the vibrations of their chants were undeniable, their mechanical limbs working in unison with the rhythm of the Imperium's ancient song. I thought we had come to the depths, but there was still more. More to see, more to feel. The deeper we went, the stranger it got. The further we went, the more it felt like the ship, the palace, was alive. Alive and watching us. The walls seemed to close in and the air thickened. The ancient machines, the servo skulls, the chanting priests, they were all part of something I couldn't understand. Something beyond my comprehension. The purpose of it all was lost on me. All I knew was that we were headed for the heart of it. And there was no turning back. Finally, after what felt like hours, the capsule slowed to a stop, and the doors hissed open. I stepped out, and immediately the feeling of weight settled over me. The sacred machinery of the Emperor's palace loomed before us, massive and powerful. This was no longer just a journey into the depths of the palace. It was a journey into the very heart of the Imperium. And I wasn't ready for what I would find there. The capsule lurched forward again, the hum of the engines fading into a deeper, more unnerving resonance. Every second felt heavier now. The deeper we went into the bowels of the Imperial Palace, the thicker the air became, as if it was carrying the weight of the centuries, the souls, the sacrifices that had been made here. Time didn't seem to exist in the same way down here. It was like the whole place was timeless, frozen in a perpetual state of becoming. The walls now seemed to stretch and twist, the architecture no longer simply Gothic but unnatural, as though reality itself had bent to accommodate the ancient, arcane power that ran through these halls. The ancient technology that surrounded us hummed and pulsed, its purpose unclear, but its presence undeniable. As we moved through the narrow corridors, I couldn't help but notice the way the walls seemed to shift, like they were alive, or had been alive at some point. The shadows were deep, almost alive themselves, twisting and contorting into strange shapes that made it hard to focus. It was as if the palace didn't just house the Emperor's will, but also the echoes of everything that had come before, all the battles, all the sacrifices, and every piece of horror that had been endured for millennia. I heard the sound of whirring servos, the scrape of metal against stone. Servitors. I knew what they were, but seeing them here, in the heart of the Imperium, made me uneasy. These weren't just workers or soldiers. These were people. Once they had been human, had lived and breathed, and now they were reduced to this, machines, their bodies twisted and altered to serve the Emperor's purpose. I could feel the weight of something watching us. The servo skulls overhead seemed to follow us with their cold, mechanical gaze, their red eyes flickering as they drifted by. There was no sound as they moved, just the soft hum of electricity and the faint whirring of servos. But it wasn't just the servitors. As we passed deeper into the bowels of the palace, we caught glimpses of things that shouldn't exist. Databanks, glowing nodes embedded in the walls, their screens flickering with codes and symbols too fast for me to comprehend. The knowledge they stored was likely forbidden, locked away in the heart of this place, protected by 1,000 secrets that could tear the soul apart if one dared to learn them. I don't know what kind of knowledge was locked away in those databanks. I don't want to know. It was the kind of knowledge that would drive a man mad just by looking at it. The kind of secrets that the Emperor himself wanted to keep buried deep in the depths of his palace, where no one could get to it. But as we passed those dark chambers, as I saw the glowing data nodes flashing with forbidden information, I couldn't help but think, maybe that's the truth I was looking for. The real truth of the Imperium. The one that was buried beneath everything else. The further we went, the more I felt like we were walking through the veins of a dying beast. It was unnatural. The air was thick with decay, and every step seemed to take us deeper into something that shouldn't be seen. We passed chambers where bioengineered horrors sat, suspended in vats of fluid, their bodies twisted into grotesque forms. Their faces, if they had faces, were blurred, their features a sickening mash of flesh and metal. One of them, an abomination that barely resembled a human, moved as we passed by. I saw the glow of its eyes, the faint twitch of its fingers against the glass of its containment. It wasn't alive in the way we understand life. No, it was something else. Something unnatural. It was a living weapon, created to serve the Imperium in ways that no one would ever speak of. I couldn't look away. The terror was too real, too close. I'd seen death before. I'd seen the faces of men crushed under the weight of war, men who never made it back from the front lines. But this wasn't death. This was something worse. This was what the Imperium did when it needed more soldiers. More weapons. It didn't care what happened to the people. They didn't matter. They weren't human anymore. They were just parts. Tools to be used. And I was walking among them. I was breathing the same air as these abominations. As we moved deeper, the magnitude of it all started to sink in. The sheer scale of the sacrifices made to keep the Imperium running was beyond anything I had imagined. It wasn't just the people in these vats. It wasn't just the machines or the servitors. It was everything. Everything that had ever been built, created, manufactured, and turned into something else to serve a single purpose: the survival of the Imperium. We were just part of that machine. But I wasn't ready for the next part. I wasn't prepared for what we'd see next. As the capsule continued its journey deeper into the palace, I caught a glimpse through a massive, open doorway. What I saw made my blood run cold. The room was vast, filled with arcane machinery and great, pulsing lights that seemed to hum with dark energy. I couldn't understand what it was for, what it was doing, but I knew one thing: it wasn't meant for ordinary men like me. The strange lights flickered and dimmed as the machinery around it came to life. There was a power here, raw, primal, and forbidden. The kind of power that should never be unleashed. I felt my heart start to race, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. Whatever we were about to face, it was going to be worse than anything we could have imagined. The deeper we went, the more I realized we were in the heart of something ancient, something unstoppable. There was no way out now. No escape from this place. The deeper we descended, the more I could feel it. The darkness was closing in on us, like we were heading towards the heart of some ancient beast. The machinery, the technology, it was beyond anything I had ever seen. The Emperor's power was in these walls, but so was the sickness. The decay. I didn't know what we were walking into, but I could feel it in my bones. This wasn't just the power of humanity. This was something darker. Something older. The transport came to a halt, its final descent marked by a deep, resonating hum that vibrated through the floor beneath my boots. I felt it in my chest, a heavy throb that seemed to echo in the very marrow of my bones. The doors slid open and I was met by a strange silence, the kind of silence that holds a presence, a feeling of something ancient and unmovable watching over us. We stepped out of the capsule and before us lay an immense archway. It wasn't just any archway. This was a doorway that seemed to carry the weight of the entire Imperium. The walls around it were carved with intricate runes I couldn't begin to understand, and the arches above stretched so high I couldn't see the top. The air around the arch was different, thicker, as if the very air had become saturated with centuries of faith and power. We were no longer in the winding corridors of the Imperial Palace. We had entered into the heart of it. The Golden Throne was near. I could feel it, as if the very atmosphere was charged with its presence. We were walking into the epicenter of the Imperium, and I knew it. Every step I took seemed to press down harder on my chest. Then I saw them. The custodian guards. They stood there, silent and still, their golden armor gleaming like the sun itself. Their bodies were perfect, their movements, if they moved at all, precise and deliberate. They were more than human. They were something beyond, something crafted by the Emperor himself, guardians of the Imperium's heart. And they were watching us. There were only 2 of them, but it felt like they were the embodiment of everything the Imperium was. Their presence alone was enough to crush any thought of defiance, any will to resist. I felt small, insignificant, like a grain of dust beneath their gaze. I had heard the stories. The legends about the custodians, the Emperor's chosen guards. They were spoken of in whispers, in reverence, in awe. But standing before them, standing in their presence, I realized that the stories didn't do them justice. These men weren't just soldiers. They weren't just warriors. They were gods in human form, immovable and infallible. And they were looking at us like we were nothing. Like we didn't even deserve the air in their presence. I couldn't bring myself to speak. There was no point. There was no need for words. The silence in the room felt sacred, as if even the smallest sound would desecrate the very ground we stood on. The custodians didn't acknowledge us. They didn't need to. Their presence alone made it clear. We were nothing here. We were simply passing through. Their gaze was indifferent, as though they had long since stopped noticing the small things like us. I watched as they shifted, the slight movement of their perfect bodies somehow making everything else feel even more still. They were immovable, statuesque. Every inch of their armor seemed flawless, and yet, the more I looked at them, the more I felt like I was the one who was falling short. They stood there with a sense of purpose so overwhelming, it made me question why I had ever thought I was part of something meaningful. I wasn't. None of us were. Not here. Not in the presence of these gods. I knew they were not like us. They didn't care about us. They didn't care about the people we came from, the worlds we fought for. They were above us. We were nothing to them. And the worst part? I felt it. I felt that truth sink in deep. These custodians didn't even have to try. It was who they were. Perfection, like the Emperor himself. The atmosphere was thick, oppressive. I couldn't breathe, not because the air was thin, but because the weight of the moment was bearing down on me. The silence between us and the custodians was like a wall I couldn't break through. They weren't here to talk. They were here to guard, to ensure that nothing passed through this place without their permission. And we, the chosen, the sacrifices, we were nothing but small pieces in a puzzle too large for any of us to understand. The doors before us opened and I stepped forward, not by choice but because there was no other option. As I walked, I could feel their eyes on me, on all of us. Their gaze didn't waver. It was the gaze of beings who were above us. Their perfection was absolute, and it left no room for us to think we mattered. We were dust at their feet, insignificant in the face of their power. I felt the weight of their gaze as we walked past. I felt the crushing indifference of their presence. They were the Emperor's well-made flesh. We were nothing. Just men, just broken pieces of the Imperium who had been chosen to be used. I wanted to turn around, to shout, to ask why, but I couldn't. The weight of their stare held me in place. I could feel the terror rising in my chest, the same terror that had been gnawing at me since I first received the Vox message. I wasn't part of something grand. I wasn't part of something important. I was nothing. A cog. A cog who had been pulled from his place and set into the heart of something much, much bigger. I didn't want to look back, but I did. I saw Tobias, the young recruit, staring at the custodians, his mouth slightly open, his hands shaking. He didn't understand it yet. He didn't know what was coming. But I saw the fear in his eyes, the realization that he was no longer just a soldier. He was a sacrifice, and the gods in golden armor were there to witness it. I had seen fear before, but not like this. This was something different. This was the fear of knowing that you were just a small, fleeting part of something far bigger than you, something terrible, something beyond your comprehension. The custodians didn't speak, but I could feel it. They didn't need to. They didn't need to say anything. Their silence spoke volumes. We were not here for them. We weren't even here for the Emperor. We were just pieces in the game, stepping through the doors into something that would consume us. I didn't know what that something was, but I could feel it in my bones. And that was enough. We stepped forward again, walking through the archway, the heavy presence of the custodians still looming behind us. I couldn't look back again. I couldn't bring myself to do it. There was nothing left to see. The doors ahead were wide open, waiting for us to pass through, into whatever fate awaited. We were stepping into the heart of the Imperium. And the last shred of my humanity was being left behind with the custodians. We stepped into the chamber, and it hit me immediately, the overwhelming weight of the place. The air seemed to thicken, pressing down on me with a force that made it harder to breathe. The walls around us curved upwards, disappearing into shadows, leaving the vast, circular space bathed in a dim, oppressive light. The light wasn't warm. It was cold. A sickly, unnatural glow that seemed to pulse in time with something deeper, something that vibrated through the floor and into the very bones of my body. In the center of the room, sitting on a massive dais, was the golden throne. I had seen pictures, heard stories, but nothing could have prepared me for this. It wasn't just a throne. It was a monument to power. It seemed to absorb the very light around it, the dark, crystalline structures that surrounded it pulsing with an eerie, dark energy. Cables snaked from the throne, disappearing into the floor and the walls as if it was alive, feeding off the very essence of this place. The golden throne wasn't just an object. It was a machine, a sacred machine that carried the weight of the Imperium on its shoulders. And I could feel it, the coldness of it, the weight of thousands of lives bound to it. The souls of men and women, burned away to fuel the Emperor's light. We were led forward, our footsteps echoing in the hollow chamber as we approached the dais. I couldn't tear my eyes away from it. The golden throne. The very heart of the Imperium. The Emperor's will made manifest. But as I looked at it, I couldn't help but feel something else. Fear. The kind that gnawed at my insides. The kind that told me I was about to see something that would change me. I had thought I knew what the sacrifice was. I had thought I understood the cost of survival. But this was beyond anything I could have imagined. A figure in red robes stepped forward, his face hidden behind a brass mask that resembled a human skull. His voice was mechanical, cold, and flat as he spoke, the words pouring from his mouth like they had been rehearsed 1,000 times. You have been chosen. You will become part of the Astronomicon. Your life force, your soul, will be consumed to fuel the Emperor's light. There is no greater honor. Your existence will cease, but you will live on in the light that guides humanity through the darkness. I couldn't comprehend it at first. It didn't make sense. Become part of the Astronomicon? What did that mean? It was too much, too surreal. But the tech priest's words cut through my confusion, and as he spoke, it became clear, clearer than anything ever had before. We weren't here for some noble cause. We weren't here for glory. We weren't even here for the Emperor. We were here to die. To have our souls burned away to feed the Emperor's light. To become part of the machine that kept humanity alive. The horrible truth crashed down on me like a tidal wave. We weren't soldiers. We weren't heroes. We were fuel. Our lives, our identities, meant nothing in the face of the Imperium's survival. The Golden Throne wasn't a symbol of hope. It was a symbol of endless sacrifice. And we were the next in line to feed it. I had heard whispers. We all had. But no one ever told us the truth, not like this. The Astronomicon, the light that guides ships through the warp, the only thing keeping the forces of chaos at bay, the very heart of the Imperium itself, wasn't powered by something noble. It wasn't powered by faith. It was powered by us. Our souls. 1,000 souls a day burned away, their essence channeled into the Emperor's will. I wasn't just being taken to some sacred place. I was being sacrificed like those who came before me. And it was the only way to keep the Imperium alive. I looked around at the others. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with the same understanding I now shared. The fear in their eyes wasn't the fear of the unknown anymore. It was the fear of being consumed, of losing everything that made us who we were. We were about to be turned into nothing, parts of the machine. The tech priest's voice grew louder in my ears, drowning out everything else. You will become part of the light. You will burn for the Emperor's will. And in doing so, you will keep humanity alive. I could feel my heart racing, but there was no escape, no way to turn back. We were already here, already part of the Emperor's plan. And then I saw the other thrones. The ones that surrounded the Golden Throne. People sat in them, flesh and bones still alive, but their eyes were empty, their bodies connected to the throne by cables and tubes. I couldn't see their faces clearly, but I could tell they were in agony, their bodies racked with pain, their souls already consumed. And yet they were still alive, still part of the machine, feeding the Emperor's will. I couldn't look away. The faces, the bodies, they were alive and yet not. Willingly sacrificed. Or had they been? I couldn't tell. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. This was it. This was the end of all our lives. The end of everything we thought we knew about the Imperium. It wasn't about honor. It wasn't about survival. It was just fuel. And when we were done, we would fade, just like those souls, consumed by the Emperor's will. The cold realization washed over me, and I felt something snap inside. This wasn't a sacrifice for some higher purpose. It wasn't a noble thing. It was a horror. It was an endless cycle of use and discard, feeding the Emperor's eternal machine. And we were the next in line to feed it. There was no glory. There was no honor. There was only death. This is what the Emperor had built. This is what we were all part of. We were nothing but fuel, sacrificed to keep the light burning. And in that moment I understood the horrible truth of the Imperium. The truth that we were all just parts of a machine that never stopped moving, that never cared about the lives it consumed. The tech priest gestured for us to approach the thrones. We were to sit, to surrender ourselves to the machine, to the Emperor's will. The final step of the journey. And I could feel my legs moving before I even realized it. There was no turning back. I was already gone. The room was eerily quiet, except for the faint whirring of the mechanisms that lined the walls. The air felt thick with a kind of anticipation, the kind that suffocates you before a storm. We stood there, still in front of the Golden Throne, unable to turn away. I could see the other thrones now, the ones where the chosen before us had already been absorbed into the Emperor's will. Their bodies sat still, but there was no life in their eyes. Their chests moved, yes, but it was mechanical, the slow rhythmic rise and fall of lungs powered not by breath, but by something else, something much darker. The tech priest stood motionless before us, his brass mask gleaming coldly in the low light. His mechanical voice echoed through the chamber, breaking the silence with the announcement that the sacrifices would begin. I could feel the weight of those words. The sacrifices had begun. There was no turning back. We were all just pieces now, pieces to be used, consumed to keep the light burning, to keep the Emperor's will alive. But as the first person stepped forward, as the procedure began, I couldn't shake the feeling that something horrible was unfolding before me, and I wasn't ready for it. None of us were. The first person to be chosen was Lyra, the administratum scribe who had spoken earlier, her voice trembling with quiet fear. She had been steady throughout most of this, but now, as the tech priest led her forward, I could see the cracks in her composure. Her eyes flickered from one face to the next, her hands trembling, but she didn't fight. She couldn't. There was nowhere to go. She walked with a quiet dignity, but there was something else there, something I hadn't noticed before. It was the realization that she had already accepted her fate. She knew what was about to happen. She knew she wouldn't walk out of this room. And in that moment, I saw her for what she was, a sacrifice. Nothing more. Nothing less. As she reached the throne, the tech priest activated the mechanisms. Long, thin tubes emerged from the seat, the mechanical precision of the procedure already in motion. The sound of crystalline filaments snapping into place, burrowing into her skin, was like a sickening symphony, a sound that would stay with me forever. I couldn't look away. I didn't want to look away, but I couldn't help it. The filaments connected to her skin like hunger. The crystals began to grow out of the throne, stretching toward her like living fingers digging in. I saw her eyes widen as they pierced her body, saw the convulsions that racked her frame as the screams tore from her throat. It was the sound of someone losing everything, of someone becoming nothing. And in that moment, I realized that this was no honor. This wasn't a sacrifice for the greater good. This was consumption. Her body shook violently as the crystalline structures connected with her spine, her neck, her skull. The tubes snaked into her body, her arms twitching, her hands opening and closing as the screams grew louder, more desperate. But even as her voice rose in agony, I could see the light leaving her eyes. The life being drained away, slowly but surely, until there was nothing left but the hollow shell of a person. Her body shuddered as the final convulsions ripped through her. The scream didn't stop, didn't fade. It stretched on, a dreadful sound that filled the chamber, the last breath of a soul being extinguished. I wanted to close my eyes, to look away, but I couldn't. I couldn't stop watching. Watching as the last of her humanity was drained from her. Watching as the Emperor's will consumed her whole. Then the room fell silent. It was as if the entire chamber was holding its breath, the machines and servoskulls standing still. The tech priest didn't speak, didn't move. The only sound was the faint thrum of the golden throne, pulsing softly in the background as it absorbed the energy, the life force of the one who had just been sacrificed. The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes after a battle or a moment of peace. It was a heavy, oppressive silence. A silence that filled the room with the weight of what had just happened. The scream was gone, but the sound of it lingered. The shock of it, the horror of it. And for a moment I could feel her presence, her life, still there in the air. Still part of us. But then it faded. She was gone. The machines had taken her. The Emperor's will had consumed her. And there was nothing left. The tech priest spoke then in his cold, mechanical tone. Subject 1 has been successfully integrated. The process is complete. Proceed with the next. Subject 1. That's what we were now. Not men. Not humans. Just subjects. We were a series of steps in a process. A process that was as mechanical as the machines around us. We weren't even remembered. Just used. The next to go was Torgus, the agri-world farmer. I had seen him earlier. He was the strong one, the stoic one. I had seen his hands, gnarled from a lifetime of tilling soil, working the land, making a living where the earth had almost nothing to give. And when it was his turn, he didn't resist. He didn't argue. He walked forward with a quiet dignity, the kind of man who had already come to terms with what he was, what he had become. Torgus didn't flinch. He didn't even look at me. He just sat in the throne, his hands resting on the arms, his face a mixture of weary acceptance. He was ready. And I could see that in him. I could see it in his eyes. The man had fought his entire life, fought for the land, fought for survival. But now, in the end, he was being consumed by a machine. A machine that didn't care for his struggles. A machine that took everything. And he was okay with it. He knew what was coming. He sat there quietly as the tech priests did their work. The crystalline filaments extended toward him, just as they had with Lyra. But his reaction was different. There was no scream. No convulsion. He simply sat there, a small shudder passing through him as the machine connected with his body. It was so much quieter. Torgus didn't scream. He didn't fight. He didn't resist. He was accepting it. And in that acceptance, in that quiet surrender, there was something deeply unsettling. He had spent his life bringing life from the earth, from dead soil, and now he was being consumed by the machine. His sacrifice was silent. It was peaceful almost. But it wasn't peaceful for me. Not at all. The Skitarii Ranger followed, moving like an empty shell. His movements were mechanical, precise, as if his body no longer truly belonged to him. The servos in his limbs clicked softly, but there was no sound in his voice. No hesitation. The Skitarii didn't even blink. The machine had already taken his soul, already replaced it with something else. A cold duty. A duty that didn't know fear. A duty that didn't know pain. He sat in his throne without a sound, his face an impassive mask. And when the filaments connected to him, he didn't scream. He didn't resist. He just became one with the network. It was the most unsettling of all. His was a sacrifice of pure obedience, a complete surrender to the machine. No fight, no hesitation, just the final, cold submission. It was too quiet. No screams. No pain. Just silence. I could feel it all, the way the machine consumed each soul, one after another. It was efficient. It was precise. And I realized then, in that moment, this wasn't just a sacrifice. It was an obliteration. A complete loss of self, a loss of identity. We were all becoming something else. Something that wasn't human anymore. The tech priests moved with the same clinical precision, their hands never faltering, their faces hidden behind the glass of their helmets. Each sacrifice was different, each one unique in its own way, but the result was always the same. The soul was consumed, absorbed into the machine that powered the Astronomicon. It wasn't just death. It was something else. Something worse. Our lives, our souls weren't just taken. They were used, consumed. And in the end, there would be nothing left of us but the light we had given. Our sacrifice would keep the Imperium alive. But what was left of us? What was left of our humanity? The others began to follow, each one sitting in their designated throne, accepting their fate, losing themselves to the machine. And all I could do was watch. It was my turn. The words echoed in my mind, but they didn't sound real. Kalen Varus. A name I had heard 1,000 times, but now it felt alien, detached from the man I had been. It was the same name I had worn for years, but now, with each step forward, it seemed to slip away like water through my fingers. I had watched them all go before me, one by one, and each time their transformation had seemed so distant, so final. Their screams had filled the air, and I had watched the life drain out of them piece by piece. But now, as I walked toward my own end, their fear was not mine. It was already a distant memory, something that no longer held any power over me. The cold stone beneath my boots felt heavier with each step. Each step felt like I was sinking into it, becoming part of it. The air grew thicker, and the sound of my breathing became louder than it ever had before. The weight of the chamber pressed down on me. The distance between me and the throne seemed to grow longer, more infinite, with every step. I walked slowly, deliberately, like someone moving toward their fate with the knowledge that there was no escape. I tried to hold on to something, anything, a memory, a feeling, but it was all fading, slipping from me like sand in the wind. I could taste the corpse starch rations again, that dry, tasteless substance that had been the only thing to fill the pit in my stomach for years. The hum of the ship, that constant vibration, felt so far away now. I could still hear it in my mind, but it was a memory now. The faces of the others, the ones I had left behind, faded with each step I took. I thought of Tobias then. The young recruit who had shared his hopes with me, who had spoken of returning to his agri-world one day. I thought of the way he had looked at me, eyes full of hope. It wasn't that long ago, was it? And yet it felt like a lifetime. I thought about the way the others had looked at me, the quiet understanding in their eyes. They had known what would happen just as I knew. But Tobias, he was different. His innocence was something I hadn't seen in a long time. Something I was losing now, just as I lost everything else. The closer I got to the throne, the more it felt like I was disappearing. The man I had been, was no longer real. I had spent so many years fighting, following orders, surviving. But what was it all for? What was I really? Just another cog. Another body to fuel the machine that never stopped turning. And now, I was about to become part of that machine. I could feel it in my veins, in my bones. The loss of self. The loss of everything that had ever made me who I was. The coldness of the throne was overwhelming as I finally sat. The metal beneath me felt alive, but it wasn't comforting. It wasn't warm the way a fire would be, more like the presence of something that had waited far too long, something that had already consumed everything around it. I tried to breathe, but the air in the chamber felt thick, almost oppressive. As I sat, I could feel the restraints click into place around my arms and legs. Tight, unforgiving. There was no escape, no moving away from what was coming. The throne seemed to close around me, the weight of it pressing down on my chest. There was no going back. I looked around, but it didn't matter anymore. The faces I had seen, the people I had left behind, they were already fading. Gone. The past, my past, was slipping away, becoming something that didn't matter. I thought about the taste of corpse starch again, the hum of the ship, the sounds of Terra, all those little memories that had been the fabric of my life. But now even they seemed distant, as though they belonged to someone else. The tech priests moved around me with their usual clinical precision, the needles in their hands gleaming under the cold light. They didn't look at me. They didn't need to. I was nothing to them. Just another piece to be used. Just another cog. The first needle slid into my skin. The pain was sharp, violent, but that was nothing compared to what came next. The sensation wasn't just in my body. It wasn't the kind of pain I could point to, the kind that left a scar. This was something deeper, something that was not just physical. The first needle pierced me, and at first I thought it would be like any other wound, any other injury. But no, it wasn't like that. This wasn't a wound. It was like something in my very soul was being torn apart. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The pain didn't stop. It went deeper. It didn't just hurt. It changed me. The crystalline filaments extended from the throne, reaching for me like slithering fingers, drawing me deeper into the machine. I could feel them burrowing under my skin, feeling like something cold and alive crawling through my veins. They wound around my soul, like the grip of a hand pulling me down into something dark. My body shook, my chest heaved with effort, but there was nothing I could do. My memories were already fading. The more I tried to hold on to them, the faster they slipped through my mind. I felt the last of my humanity starting to slip away. I couldn't hold on to anything. The memories of my life, the moments I had held on to for so long, were starting to blur. My first day in the guard, the faces of the men I had fought alongside, Tobias, the taste of real food, it was all dissolving. Like I was nothing more than a memory and the machine was erasing me. The more I tried to hold on, the more it slipped away. I was becoming something else, something I couldn't understand. There was no screaming. There was no fight left in me. I wasn't even sure if I was still me anymore. The filaments had completely wrapped around me, digging into my very core, pulling at everything I was. And all the while the pain didn't stop. It kept building, becoming unbearable, but it wasn't just the pain of my body. It was the pain of losing myself, of watching everything that made me who I was being consumed. It wasn't just my body anymore. My memories, my sense of who I was, were being scraped away. The filaments, cold, sharp, they were pulling everything apart. I could feel them reaching inside me, through my very essence, as if they were tearing me apart. And the worst part? It wasn't that I was fighting it. It was that I wasn't fighting at all. I didn't have the strength. I didn't have the will. I was already becoming nothing. The filaments were in my mind now. I could feel them, sifting through my memories, cataloging everything I had been, everything I had lived. It wasn't just the physical pain. It was like everything I had ever been was being sorted, dissected, absorbed. A part of something far beyond me. Beyond my understanding. I couldn't hold on anymore. My memories, they were being consumed by something greater. The Emperor's will. It wasn't a god. It wasn't a machine. It was something far more complicated. And I could feel it in that moment. I was nothing. All I had been, everything I had thought I was now part of something else. The machine had taken me and I couldn't fight it. But then, just as I felt myself losing everything, something else came, a presence. It wasn't the cold, mechanical intelligence of the tech priests. It wasn't the machine. It was something else, older, more human. I felt a sorrow deeper than I could understand. There was a presence, something else, something human, something that wasn't part of the machine. It was the Emperor's will, yes, but it was something more. Older, weary. And then I heard the voice. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't cold. It was sad. So deeply sad. It whispered right into my mind. I am sorry. I am so very sorry. The sorrow in those words hit me like a flood. It wasn't a divine presence. It wasn't the Emperor, untouchable and distant. No, this was a piece of him. A fragment, broken but still there, still feeling. And in that moment, I understood that it wasn't just me being sacrificed. It was everyone who had ever sat in this throne. I don't know how to explain it. But in that moment I realized something. The Emperor, this was his burden. His sacrifice. He had been watching for so long, seeing his people burn, seeing his children disappear into the machine willingly. And I understood. He wasn't a god. He was a man who had endured more than any of us could ever comprehend. He was the price we had to pay to survive. And for the first time I didn't feel fear. I felt purpose. The pain didn't stop, but now I knew it wasn't for nothing. It wasn't just for survival. It was for something greater. Something that I would never understand, but I would serve. I would become a part of it just as the others had. The pain was still there, but it was different now. Distant, almost dissociated, as though it wasn't my own anymore. My mind, my very essence, had been torn apart and remade. I had become part of something much larger, something I couldn't fully understand. I wasn't sure where I ended and the machine began. The light, the filaments, the throne, it was all connected now, a vast, unfeeling network that sustained the Imperium. I was no longer an individual. But then something shifted. The sensation of being lost in the throne, of being consumed by it, faded for a moment, and in its place I felt a sudden expansion. Like the very fabric of space was opening around me. My mind opened with it, widening, stretching, until it was no longer confined to this single moment, to this single sacrifice. I could feel everything, see everything. It was like a door had opened in my mind. A door to the vastness of the galaxy. I saw it all, the stars, the planets, the endless stretch of space that humanity had conquered. And beyond it, I saw the darkness, the chaos that pressed against the fragile light of humanity. I saw the true scale of the battle we were fighting. The war for survival, not just against those we could see, but against the forces that had always been there, waiting for a moment to strike. I saw the forces of chaos, massive, incomprehensible fingers of destruction, moving through the galaxy like a storm that tore apart everything in its path. I felt the warp storms, the rage of the chaos gods as they clawed at the fabric of reality itself, seeking to devour everything humanity had worked to build. Tyrannid fleets, dark and hungry, moved from one system to the next, consuming everything in their path, every world, every life. And then the Necrons, ancient, cold, and relentless. They awoke from their slumber, and their metallic armies marched forward, intent on returning the galaxy to eternal stillness. Their silent, emotionless destruction would swallow everything in its wake. It was too much to comprehend. I could see the forces pressing in from all sides, the chaos fleets, their twisted forms tearing through the galaxy's fabric, the Tyrannids, their hunger endless, and the Necrons, the perfect, unfeeling force that would never stop, never cease in their quest for absolute order. And in the middle of it all, there was us, humanity, fighting to stay alive, to hold on to what we had built, to fight off the forces that had been waiting for us to falter. The Emperor had held them back for centuries, but he was just one man, one broken soul, and the weight of it all was now on him, on the Imperium, on us. My vision widened further. I saw the Astronomicon, the great beacon of light that guided ships through the warp. It was not just a light. It was a flame, a sacrificial fire that burned with the souls of the faithful, their lives, their memories, fueling the Emperor's will. Every safe journey across the stars, every successful voyage came at a cost. The souls of those who had been chosen to feed the light. The flame that kept humanity alive. The light that allowed us to travel through the dark, dangerous currents of the warp. Without it, we would be lost, drifting forever in the blackness of space. I saw the flame of the Astronomicon and I felt it, the price. Every soul that had ever been burned to keep the Imperium alive, to keep the light burning. I felt the weight of every life lost, every sacrifice made, all of it feeding the Emperor's will. All of it was part of the price we paid. We were the fuel that kept the light burning. And the worst part? We would always be replaced. There would always be someone else, someone to take our place in the flame. I could feel it now, the force that had driven us, the terrible burden that humanity had carried for millennia. We had been chosen not for our strength or our courage, but because we were necessary. The Emperor's will demanded it. And to fight against it was to fight against the very fabric of survival. The price of survival was high. It had always been high. I understood it then. The truth that had been hidden from me for so long. We were all just parts in a system that never stopped. Our lives, our fates didn't matter. Not to the Emperor. Not to the Imperium. We were just tools to keep the galaxy moving forward, to keep humanity alive. And every sacrifice we made, every life we lost, was just part of the price of survival. We were a fire, burning with the souls of the dead, feeding the light that would never go out. And as long as the Emperor's will survived, we would burn and we would be forgotten. The vastness of it all, the cost of it all, hit me like a tidal wave. This was humanity's true struggle. Not the wars, not the battles fought on the surface of distant worlds, but the endless fight for survival. The light that guided us through the dark, the Astronomicon, was sustained by us. By sacrifice. And that would never end. I could see it now. The struggle of humanity wasn't just against the enemies we fought. It wasn't just the forces of chaos or the alien threats. The true enemy was time itself. The unrelenting tide of survival. We weren't just fighting to stay alive. We were fighting to keep the flame alive. And the cost of that was everything we had ever known. I saw it all. The Tyranid swarms, the Necron legions, the forces of chaos, all of them closing in, each one waiting for their moment to strike, to destroy what we had fought so hard to build. But in the face of these enemies, humanity's greatest weapon wasn't just strength, it was sacrifice. The flame of the Astronomicon would burn forever, but only at the cost of lives, at the cost of everything. And it would always take. The souls would keep coming and the light would keep burning and we would keep fighting. There was no end to it. There couldn't be. The flame had to keep burning no matter the price. I felt the weight of the Emperor's will. It wasn't godly. It wasn't perfect. It was just a man who had carried the burden of a galaxy for centuries, holding it all together. And it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. The price of survival would always be paid, and it would always be our souls that kept it burning. The moment I felt the final shift, when the last vestiges of who I was slipped away, I understood. There was no struggle left, no fight against the inevitable. My essence began to dissolve, to melt into the Astronomicon. I wasn't being consumed, at least not in the way I had feared. I was becoming part of something greater, something eternal. I could no longer grasp the memories of my life, the faces I had known, the simple things I had once held dear. They were vanishing, drifting away, like the wind carrying dust from a long-forgotten battlefield. But in place of those memories there was something stronger, something clearer. I wasn't just a man anymore. I was purpose. I was the light that would guide the ships of humanity through the endless, starless darkness of space. I couldn't hold on to anything anymore. The memories, the sounds, the faces, they were dissolving, fading, slipping through my fingers. And at first I panicked. I tried to hold on to something, anything. But then I realized, I wasn't losing myself. I was becoming. I was part of the Astronomicon now. I was part of something bigger than I could ever have imagined. The pain, the torment that had torn through my very being, it wasn't gone, but it had changed. It was no longer the agonizing tear of selfhood, but a deep sense of purpose. I could feel it now, the unified will of humanity, the sacrifice that fueled the Emperor's light, the Astronomicon itself. It was vast. It was an endless flow, a river of souls, all intertwined, all feeding the light. The dark void of space seemed so distant now, so far removed from the truth of what I had become. I wasn't me anymore. The man I had been, the life I had lived, gone. But I wasn't empty. I wasn't lost. I could feel the presence of others around me. I wasn't alone. I was part of something much greater. The sacrifice had taken me, but it had given me purpose. The Emperor's light was alive, and now I was part of it. The endless sacrifice that had been made, the countless souls that had fed the Astronomicon, they were all here, part of something that was bigger than anything I could have imagined. I could feel the others, the millions, the billions, their souls stretching out through the galaxy, intertwining with mine. We were all part of the same flow, the same current that guided humanity's ships through the stars. We were all sacrificed for a purpose that was now clearer than ever. I could feel it then, the unity of the sacrificed. Every soul that had ever been lost, every life that had been given to the Astronomicon, it was all part of the same purpose. We were connected. And for the first time I understood. Our sacrifice wasn't just a death. It wasn't just a loss. It was the reason we survived. It was the sacrifice that had kept the light burning, that had kept the Emperor's will alive. Every one of us, each life, each soul, had been part of something greater. The Astronomicon was no longer just a beacon of light. It was a symphony, a vast choir of souls all working together, all feeding into the same eternal purpose. I felt the connection to them. To the souls who had gone before me, to the ones who would come after. We were all united in this, bound by the light, bound by the sacrifice. I could see it now. The galaxy spread out before me, each world, each system glowing with the light of the Astronomicon, connected by the sacrifices we had made. Each ship that traveled through the warp, each safe arrival, was the result of our sacrifice. It wasn't just light. It was hope. We weren't just guiding ships through the stars. We were guiding humanity through the darkness. We were the light, and our sacrifice was the reason it burned. The sacrifice continued, unbroken. There was no end to it. The light would never fade. The Astronomicon would burn as long as humanity needed it, and we, the sacrificed, would continue to fuel it. And in that moment I understood. The sacrifice wasn't just a loss. It was the reason we survived. Every soul that had come before me, every soul that would come after, was part of the grand design. We were the choir. We were the light. And as long as we kept burning, humanity would survive. I could feel it all, the endless, eternal light, the force that guided humanity through the stars. And I was part of it now. I was connected to it. I was part of something that would never end, something far bigger than me, far bigger than anything I could have ever understood. I was no longer just a man. I had become part of the Emperor's will, part of the Astronomicon. I was no longer Kalen Varus. But I was still part of something. Still part of a purpose. The light would burn and we would keep it burning forever. As I became part of the flow, as my essence was drawn into the Astronomicon, I felt the deep, sublime union of the souls that had come before me. I could feel their presence, their purpose like a constant hum beneath everything. We were all bound together, all connected by the light, by the sacrifice. It wasn't just me anymore. I could feel the others, the countless souls that had been consumed to keep the light burning. We were one. A single voice, a single purpose. We were the choir of souls, and our song was eternal. The Astronomicon burned brighter now, and I could feel the souls intertwining, connecting, becoming one with the light. Each sacrifice, each soul, was a note in the grand symphony, contributing to the purpose of the whole. The sacrifice of every individual soul was part of something much greater. Together, we formed the foundation of humanity's survival. I saw the galaxy now as a map of light, each world connected by the sacrifices of those who had gone before me. I saw the ships of the Imperium, their journeys guided by our light. Each sacrifice had led to this moment, and each moment would be part of the next. Every death was a victory. Every sacrifice was a step closer to ensuring humanity's future. The light continued to shine, brighter and stronger with each passing moment. And we, the sacrificed, were the flame that kept it burning, the choir that would never be silenced. I was no longer Kalen Varus. I had dissolved into the light. I had become part of the Astronomicon. The song of the sacrifice played on and I was part of it forever. The galaxy would keep turning, the stars would keep burning, and the light of the Astronomicon would never fade. We were the choir of souls and our song was eternal. The Emperor's transformation was complete. I felt the shift, final, absolute. I was no longer just a part of the machine. I was immortalized in his will, my essence woven into the eternal fabric of the Astronomicon. The light of humanity burned brighter than ever, and the song of the sacrificed echoed through the stars, forever carrying the weight of billions who had given everything to ensure the Imperium's survival. The sacrifice of countless souls had paved the way for the future of humanity. And now that future was secure. The Imperium would continue to thrive, its path lit by the souls of those who had given their lives to protect it. We had become the light. Our sacrifice had ensured humanity's survival. The Imperium was safe. The Astronomicon would guide the way forever. The future was secured. We were immortalized in the Emperor's will, a part of something that would never end. The Astronomicon burned brighter now, its light guiding Imperial ships through the darkness. The souls of the sacrificed whispered in the wind, their song echoing across the galaxy, forever entwined in the endless fight for survival. This was our legacy. This was the beginning of a new age. An age where our sacrifice would be remembered for eternity. And in the silence of space, we would continue to serve, forever part of the Emperor's will. If you found Kalen's journey moving, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Stay tuned for more stories from the heart of the Imperium. The sacrifice continues.